This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Artisanal Agency, the exclusive representative of the This Week in Tech podcast network. Reach Twit.tv's tech-savvy, affluent, highly engaged audience by booking your campaign now. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 561, Shysterism. Monday, September 30th, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. Trust is a funny thing. Once it's broken, it's hard to reestablish. And at the rate the ad industry has broken trust with consumers, it would seem near impossible to repair. Yet some are making a dire call for advertisers to do just that. Is it possible? Tonight we'll discuss. Also unpacking the truth of the internet ad juggernaut, whether blockchain is now ready for prime time, what's on Facebook's horizon, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the VP of Digital Marketing and Advertising at Westfield, Mr. Christopher Backus. Chris, what's going on?
I'm doing great, Bob. How are you? And glad to be back on.
Glad to have you here. Now, next, she's the founder and president of analytics consultancy Quantent Marketing. We say hello to Miss Tamara Gaffney. Tamara, hi, how are you?
Hey, hello. Fall is in the air and it's a wonderful day.
I wouldn't know. I'm in New York City. There's no fall unless you go to Central Park, and I haven't been there in a while. Now, also on the panel, we have digital marketing consultant Mr. Sean McGinnis. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Bob. How are you?
I'm well. And finally, we welcome back marketing capabilities training and digital transformation consultant, Mr. Sam Mani. Sam, hi.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Can't wait to get going with the great topics we have this week.
Yeah, the real down topics this week. I think we were joking before the show that this is like a real sad week with a lot of bad topics, but such is life. Now that makes the show seem really terrible, doesn't it? That's a really terrible way to start off
so
the program.
People are listening in now, you're like, no, stay on. There's going to be like 55 minutes of awesomeness.
It's actually going to be a really dynamic conversation of pretty sad topics. So let's get on with
lots
the show.
Of data.
With lots of data. Well, let's jump right in. First up, Keith Weed, the former marketing chief for Unilever, is on a mission to reestablish trust between advertisers and consumers. With a rallying cry of trust or bust, this movement that started in the UK is now attempting to migrate to the US. My question, though, Sam, is can trust really be repaired with an audience like we have today that's increasingly sophisticated, that knows all the ad tricks, and is jaded as a result? Is it possible to rebuild trust with the consumer today?
Well, Bob, I'm a little bit disappointed you asked me a closed question, yes or no question, and I could really be annoying and answer no. And
you could, but I know that you won't. I know that you won't. I've never heard once when you've ever answered in a monosyllable type answer. Come on.
I'm going to say maybe, Bob. If trust, trust is. He talks about in the article you shared with us. Is if they don't build trust, people are going to move to content or sponsorships, which will cause funding issues. Which seems a bit of an odd claim because that's already happening anyway. So that seems quite quaint. And it's the route that marketers are already going and consumers are already going. I think for me, the pivotal quote in the article is that brings true national pride here is that there isn't a US version of the Advertising Association of which represents the whole industry. So the UK have something which represents everyone, but the US has still got to get there. And I think that's such a hard challenge to get a joined up story in the industry. But having said all that, in terms of building trust, I think in the last couple of weeks there's been some issues. You've got the issue with Juul, the tobacco, that smokeless tobacco, if that's right, the vaping product,
Vaping product, e-cigarette.
And their agencies just dropped them. And in the UK, there was a couple of ads banned from Volkswagen and Philadelphia Cheese for gender stereotyping. And so even the industry is going through challenges right now. And actually, if you're into your Harvard Business Review, the issue a couple of months ago was called the trust issue. And so they were calling out the Facebooks of this world and the Netflixes and Spotify. So we know there's a problem, and fixing it is going to be a real challenge. And I want to be optimistic that advertising industry can get its house together and be more transparent and make sure that there is a better outcome so that people aren't duped by native advertising. But it's, for me, a really difficult, gnarly subject. And I'll just paraphrase and then move on to solutions potentially. But some of the areas which I think there could be hope is things like reducing the ad bombardment and ads following and chasing you. In the UK, they've talked about companies signing up to this gold standard now, so that there is a better acting in better faith for some of these organizations and operating in a best-in-class way. So I think that's a good starting point. Another area is data security. Another area is using advertising to drive social change and a force for good. And I think that's probably the space that the most trust can be built by advertising, and actually standing for something and working with brands that represent something positive is a tangible way, I think, that brands can go about it, and advertisers can be part of the solution. But in some of the other areas, in terms of just the digital experience on a lot of the sources that we use for the show, the experience is a nightmare. You're getting bombarded, you're clicking and closing things, and the user experience is truly horrible. And so I'm struggling to be overall positive, but I think there could be a couple of areas. And as I say, advertising as a force for good is the one space where I feel that there is I think a common approach that could be successful.
So,
but is it really? I mean, it seems to me we've just gone through with Awareness Day. I mean, there's been a huge pushback. So many consumers now are seeing through some of the social good campaigns for what they are, which is just a ploy to try and manipulate behaviors and manipulate the feelings of the consumer. I mean, is that the key? It seems to me that we've got this, and the things that the marketing world is going through is not just endemic to marketing. There's a lack of trust overall in all of our old former institutions. Mm-hmm. It's no longer the 1950s, right? I mean, when will that turn a corner, and is there anything that we can really do about it? I'm sure that there are steps we can take, but are they really going to lead to the type of change we'd all like to see? That's my question.
Something that we need to consider is whether or not people have ever really trusted advertising, and also the fact that it used to be that advertising had a very loud voice and the consumer had a very weak voice. Mm-hmm. Now the consumer has an equally strong voice in society due to the fantastic tools of social media that are constantly a thorn in our side. I mean, is it that this is a situation that cannot be solved at this point? And that's really the premise I want to discuss. I want to find out, do you guys really believe that it's possible to rebuild trust with a consumer that is as sophisticated as they are today?
Well, the data that was behind some of this work in the UK shows that trust in advertising has declined from the mid-50s down to the 30s. So it wasn't 100% even 20 years ago, and it's going to continue to decline because there is more democracy and democratization of information, of knowledge, of communication. So social media has broken the rule of one-way communication, and now communication is multi-directional and co-creation and user-generated. So it will never get up to the 50s and 60s, but is the 30s a leveling off point, or is it going to drop down to 20 and 10? I think at the end of the day, brands, advertisers, corporations have to be honest. They have to act in integrity. And the challenge for that is that there's more and more stuff coming out that we didn't used to know about, that we didn't used to find out about, and it's coming out faster and faster and faster. So right. I think the transparency is being hidden. So I think companies, it behooves them to be transparent sooner rather than later, but it's inherently risky. And so, another kernel of hope is a number of the B Corp corporations have come out in the last CEOs have come out in the last couple of weeks and saying and advocating that. So if more organizations were B corporations, which basically have to deliver for their stakeholders and deliver for the community as well, that may change the behavior and the soul of organizations, which then builds more trust and integrity into sort of the corporate world. But again, in this space, hey, we're talking about for-profit companies. What about the non-profits and charitable organizations? They're probably going north in terms of gaining trust and gleaning trust, because in the current climate, they are showing what they do for society. And I think actually a lot of those organizations aren't struggling. Maybe we need more, I don't know, charitable advertising organizations which aren't for-profit businesses.
I'm not so sure that the nonprofits are not struggling, because a lot of them have also suffered from finding out that what they, the amount of money that they were supposed to give to a cause didn't really go that direction. And there's a lot of Shysterism in nonprofit. So
I'm stealing that word, Shysterism. I'm writing it down.
But and if we're talking in business about getting to 30% trust and calling that a win, I would have to say that advertising is on its way out.
I was trying to be positive here. Okay,
I hear you. I do. But it's kind of the buggy whip of the 21st century. It's and I have lots more stats. We have more on advertising, so I'll save them. But I have to say, I think that advertising as we used to know it is definitely on its way to extinction.
Well, but is it that way because of the two-way communication capabilities, or is it that way because of a lot of the data security issues? Like I don't know if you guys watched the Netflix documentary, The Great Hack, but I was thinking about that while we were kind of reading Mr. Weed's comments. And, a lot of people are very, apprehensive now about what they're kind of sharing with advertising or what they're sharing on social platforms. And so they're starting to think about it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it has created this atmosphere that the trust has been broken and has been violated in certain aspects. And certainly advertising is at the center of that, because a lot of that data has been used to go ahead and decide how we're going to use advertising across these platforms.
Well, I mean, I was poking around before the show, and when there was recent published reports from researchers about how all your audio devices, listening devices are leaking data and proactively sharing data. So your smart TV, your smart audio. There was one that said Alexa was triggered by words that begin with S inadvertently. So anything you say begins with an S actually triggers Alexa's listening without you knowing. So we're surrounded by a lot of failures in things, and failures in the technology, failures in the people, and they were always there. Now we have more access to it. So how are we going to deal with it now we know more? And so I don't think these organizations were always perfect. So maybe the trust had been inflated to the 50s and 60% when it should always have been 30. And so I'm optimistic that it will level off, but I think I don't want to believe that it's going to fall off to zero, because that kind of will lead to anarchy. Because if you can't trust anything, and you can't trust the truth of the products you buy or the messages that you receive, then what or who can we trust? I don't want to see that dystopian future that were in those movies from 10 years ago, when where people were just like all out war and everything society had crumbled to nothing. So I'd like to believe that the 30% is the baseline that people will wake up and want to try and fix and improve.
Well, looking at the data, people are not leaving advertising because of trust issues as much as they're leaving it because they just find it annoying and irrelevant. And they would rather actually hear from their tribe. So really, it's more about referrals and influencers. And even influencers are subject to use my word again, Shysterism. But the fact is that when you talk to a 20-year-old about advertising, most of the time what they'll say is, I don't really want to learn about things that way. Even if it's something I'm interested in, I'd rather learn about it from my friends and my tribe.
Yeah, it feels to me like we're living in an age of cynicism, and that cynicism is really governing how we look at all of these various different institutions. I mean, it's the transparency, and it's the many-to-many relationships, and the ability to communicate, and sort of the clue train writ large 20 some odd years later. All of those things are happening together, and I think any company and any institution like marketing is just one more scandal away from another 5-point drop. I mean, the Edelman Trust Barometer has been leaning this direction for many, many, many years. They've been surveying one of the two great sort of pieces of content marketing. I'll reference another later in the cast, but I think it's just been fascinating to watch, and I wonder if we'll ever really get back. I don't know where it all began, but it feels to me like it's a late 60s / early 70s Watergate phenomenon where we all just started to no longer trust all the institutions that used to be trusted.
Well, I'd say that again, being the optimist, or not being naive, as the world changes, as organizations change, and we're more representative in terms of more inclusive, more diversity, different voices have the power to speak. Different people, different genders are leading organizations. There'll be more trust simply because people see themselves and see that representation. And we know all the data from McKinsey about diverse organizations make more money and are more successful. Having 3 women in leadership positions leads to disproportionate profit growth, etc. So I think as we wrestle with this as a society and culture, and we come through it the other side and make changes, again, perhaps there will be drivers of improvement so that all the sort of negative tailwinds aren't pulling us down, but actually the changes as we learn and grow and get better and become better and smarter, hopefully that will help change the trajectory. But I don't want to believe that the line is only going to go down and we're going to sort of fall apart. I'm not gonna stand on that one. I'm gonna stand for the optimism and look for those data points that support that argument.
Well, what are the practical realities here? What are the practical things that you can recommend? Anybody on the panel can jump in here. What practical things can we do in order to move forward? I've heard a lot of great ideas like let's do more cause-based marketing. Let's do more data trust awareness. Let's make our ads more interesting or valuable. Let's use influencer marketing. These are great tactical solutions, but overall, how do we need to change the business? Any ideas, practical changes about that you would try to implement in order to affect a movement toward building trust again with consumers?
I agree with Sam. I think it boils down to a level of integrity and transparency and the way that brands are willing to communicate with their constituents. I think the caveat there is I think maybe 35 or 40% is the ceiling. It could be that when you're willing to communicate, I mean, think about Nike and all of the blowback from some of the things. I mean, they have identified their tribe and they are communicating with their tribe at the expense of potentially dealing with some other tribes, right? And so I think the trust is up among those that trust Nike to do that. They're speaking their language and sort of living their beliefs. And that goes across Patagonia. There's so many great examples that we can look at and say, I'm willing to bet you that those brands, some of the ones that Sam mentioned around, diverse hiring practices and the ones that are more profitable, they are probably trusted more than ever by their core constituency, but distrusted by others. And so that's creating an artificial ceiling where back in the 50s, when we only had 3 channels to pay attention to, it was just a different world.
Yeah,
the world all is fractured.
I'll just, if you were looking, this may be very tactical, but I'm just thinking about advertising that shows representation of all of humanity, people with disabilities, people from different ethnicities and cultures, people who beauty ads which don't have people, stick thin and pearly white teeth, showing people the number of brands now which are saying we're not going to Photoshop our models anymore. The amount of celebrities coming out saying I refuse to do another photo shoot with my with my body Photoshop because it's not the real me. And being brave enough to do that in 2019 now sets the tone that people can actually be vulnerable and they can be real. So I think those more emotive, more EQ driven sort of parts of our culture that are coming to the fore is our savior, because if you don't have to be perfect, Nike's is just do it. It doesn't matter what size you are, what shape you are. And I know a number of brands are having plus size models or introducing plus size athletic wear because apparently larger people can work out and they're perfectly fine. Why are we targeting to the stick thing size 4 and super bulky husky people? Let's actually target everyone. And so those changes in stores, in society and culture, I think are driving will drive a turnaround. It's just that's coming from the culture and not coming from the industry, and the industry is moving slowly by gritted teeth. But I think the more you change the representation, the hiring, and really just talk about reality. I think there is hope for us because we're seeing that in products, in categories, in brands right now, and they're winning market share and they're winning attention.
But
And so,
I think Sean made a really good point, though. It's the fact that maybe 30% is the ceiling of trust, because all these things that you're talking about are really well-known, effective strategies that have garnered a lot of attention in the ad press and general media coverage about it. But overall, it's not really moved the needle in terms of brand trust. I mean, somewhat, you got certain tribes, like you mentioned, who are like really into your ad for while it's running, and then they forget about you. And it's just like we're always one scandal away from being dropped off the cliff. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tamara.
It's okay. Just I wanted to put in that maybe it's all about pivoting. Google is at $116 billion for ad search revenue. And if you took 10 billion out of that and used it for improving customer experiences, you would build more trust that way, because when you have a bad experience, you lose all your trust. And it doesn't matter how much advertising you throw at someone after that, they're not going to trust you. So a perfect example would be I had a problem with Microsoft and I got on Twitter and they helped me. They got me a credit. I had a wonderful experience with Delta where they sent me my year in review of all the places I'd been to. And it was just a kind of cool, shareable thing. These are not traditional advertising, but they help me build trust because I'm building a rapport with this brand, this company, through other methods, through customer care, through the way that they handle pricing challenges. All of that stuff is really where people care about more than trying to build trust through advertising.
Yeah, I'd build on that and sort of second that. It's true. So that means brands have to take social seriously. And there are a number of CMOs and senior leaders who still kind of sneer, but the brands being responsive. And I think the problem in the sort of gotcha culture of calling people out right now, a lot of brands are going silent when there's a problem or a snafu. They're just saying nothing rather than saying something. So I think the two examples you shared are great. But how many brands, when you do ask them, reach out to them on Twitter or social, they actually just say nothing because it might make them look bad. And so I think the shift to other ways of connecting and communicating is pivotal and is true. We just got to get better as an industry at living into it.
Well, we're going to move on and talk next about an interesting story about the internet's growth. Apparently, ad spending on the internet is not just projected to outpace all other media, but vastly outpace it. We'll get to that in just a minute. But today, I have important news. We are welcoming a new sponsor to the program, and this one is for all you brands and media buyers out there who are looking to connect with a technology-minded audience. That's because Artisanal Agency is the exclusive representative for Twit.tv, one of the most prestigious tech podcasting networks out there. And let me tell you, they are crushing it. First, a little fanboyism. I got to say this. When I was putting together this show, the BeanCast, it was Twit.tv and their flagship show, This Week in Tech, that inspired me more than any other podcast. I mean, the panels that Leo Laporte runs over there are really phenomenal, always entertaining, always informative. And that energy has expanded over the years into a variety of awesome programs, all catering to the tech world. Shows like Mac Break Weekly, iOS Today, Security Now, Windows Weekly, and more. All of them are stellar programs. And it's jaw-dropping when you consider their numbers. 50 million downloads a year. Now, let's let that sink in for a minute. I'm trying to get my head around this. 50 million downloads a year. 70% of that audience that's downloading it works directly in tech. So it's exactly who you need to speak to. And 82% of the people who listen to their programs say that they have bought a product directly as the result of a Twit.tv ad recommendation. And let's not gloss over that last point, because it's an actual live read recommendation they are offering here. Not just anyone can advertise on Twit.tv. Artisanal Agency carefully vets each sponsor so that their tech journalist hosts can offer your brand a wholehearted recommendation, while at the same time you can relax knowing that there won't be any brand safety issues because everybody's vetted. So whether you're coming with a completely baked campaign or need everything from graphics to ad copy help, Artisanal Agency offers a hands-on approach. They ensure your campaigns run seamlessly, from onboarding hosts to delivering creative assets to monitoring your ad reads. They do it all for you. So reach out today to start your campaign on twit.tv. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. It's Artisanal Agency. I won't spell it, but you can find it in the show notes, artisanalagency.com to find out more, or email hello@artisanalagency.com. That's hello@artisanalagency.com. And we thank them very much for their support of the BeanCast. Well, PC Mag published some eye-opening statistics that show just how far internet advertising has come. Zenith, the media buying shop, predicts nearly 52% of all ad spend will go to the internet by 2021, while eMarketer has predicted at the beginning of this year the gap to be more like 54% in favor of the internet spend by the end of this year. Tamara, I won't dispute these predictions. I mean, they come from some pretty reputable sources, but I do wonder whether we should be still lumping together everything digital into one bucket. Aren't we getting more of the same type? Aren't we getting more of the same types of content of older media only in a digital format? It seems kind of ludicrous to continue to call one whole section of ad spend internet when internet is so diversified.
Yeah, I take your point. I mean, it's basically like saying, well, they're really kind of putting traditional old school advertising against digital, except that they're breaking out all the old school and lumping all the digital together, which is okay because it's a pivot point, and pivot points are interesting. It's a little interesting, too, that it took this long for traditional to be less than digital, considering that the entire world is pretty much digital at this point, and most forms of media consumption have really shifted to digital. But as far as your question goes, with regards to the different types of digital, the biggest in that category is and has been paid search. And you could say that that's like the directory. And in that sense, it's really destroyed the directory business. I don't even think there is a directory business anymore, but paid search is 40% of that digital spend. Paid social is 20%. Display advertising, which is kind of like print, is around 15, and YouTube comes in at about 10, which is a lot of video. So the main thing that I think advertisers are doing is they're taking their television video and they're running that online. And so that's a fair statement that that's just a transition of the exact same type of creative. But what I wonder about, it might be that people are paying for more digital advertising, but to our previous conversation, I went and looked up some of the ad blocker statistics because they're paying for it.
Yeah.
But they're not seeing it. So
that's something I didn't explore in our show notes, and I feel really embarrassed about it because ad fraud makes up the most conservative estimates say something like 20%, but I've heard some statistics that are going as high as 75% of all ads on the internet are just wasted money. They're not being seen. That's incredible.
Right, and Digital Information World says that 47% of all the people who are browsing have installed an ad blocker globally. 27% is the U.S. number, which is coming from eMarketer in July 2019. You can say there's some wiggle room in these stats. I'm sure they're not perfect, but the reality is that a lot of the ad spend in digital is getting blocked. So it really isn't getting all the way through. So in terms of total impressions, I would have to say we're probably still not at that pivot point.
I want to go to the digital I wanted to go to the digital marketer. We have 3 digital marketers here, 4 digital marketers here. But so which one shall I go to? Let's go to Chris. Chris, what is your opinion about this? What would you say about what Tamara has shared in terms of the statistics and how we're representing the internet as kind of a lump sum, movement or something?
I think it's a fair point. I mean, it does seem kind of funny when you look at the chart of looking at all the traditional media all broken out, and then you get one big bar for internet. And I'm not sure we just call it internet anymore anyway, but it
sounds so 1980s, exactly.
I know, right? Super Information Highway is doing 54% of advertising. But I mean, there's a lot of different things. I mean, obviously there's digital video, there's paid search, which is very different than running multiple banner ads. We're running social ads. yes, there's a lot of breakouts that we should look at when we break that out. I thought it was really interesting that Tamara brought up how significant the amount of the percentage was from paid search. That definitely leads to a lot of that digital advertising, which is kind of unsexy, uninteresting one. It's not really affected, I believe, by ad blockers. I'm not an ad blocker expert, so maybe paid search is too. But that kind of data, it's really very someone close to being in market. They're trying to find what they're looking for. So advertisers are making sure that they're going to see that content predominantly within a search display. So that helps a lot to go ahead and move someone who is hopefully pretty close to purchase. So I can see why there's a favorability over some of the other spots, say like mobile banner advertising or even like pre-roll on YouTube. So yes, it's broken out. It would be more helpful and probably a bit more honest of what's happening across the different platforms, because they are quite different and they're honestly also very different advertisers. I also think, though, that
let me stop you right there,
services to Chris, help out with some of this stuff with fraud.
Chris, let me stop you right there, because it's just like that's a really super interesting point. The fact that we have so many different types of ad units and so many different types of medias. That's at the heart of my argument. Does this stifle not competition, but innovation? Does it stifle innovation to have so many medias being lumped together, and the ad formats are so different? I mean, it's just like, if we're lumping it together, are we taking our eye off the ball in terms of looking at how to best serve the different medias with digital type ad units?
Go ahead, Samuel.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
Well, to answer that question, Bob, I think, if you did see it broken out and see kind of the growth year over year and what changes are happening, you would be able to kind of see what happens with different content. So if video content on the internet is getting significant growth, well, that could be an indicator that there's a lot of innovation or change happening within that particular channel. And so I don't know if it's being stifled per se by lumping it, because honestly, this is just kind of a research study that kind of looks at overall spend and what kind of spend is happening across media buying, which isn't really the most innovative analysis of anything. But if you did see kind of the breakout, you could probably find out which ones are more innovative industries, or which ones have kind of plateaued and kind of matured and stabilized. And I think that would kind of give you some idea of what's happening within that particular thing, especially if you're not that familiar with internet advertising. That
you're talking,
you need to figure out what's going on.
You're talking from one second. Yeah. You're talking from the perspective of the person who pays attention to digital advertising and actually pays attention to the stats. And I think the truth is, it's more like what Tamara said earlier, that people are taking their TV commercials or their radio commercials or their ad copy from their print campaign or whatever they're doing offline, and they're just translating these formats into digital. And it's not really looking at the media itself and finding a more innovative way to do things. And I think that's in large part because we consider this is the digital campaign instead of talking about the podcast campaign or the YouTube campaign.
That's what, that's where I wanted to come in, because I decided I don't like it. Don't call it the internet. It seems like someone wrote this for like the CFO to be able to be comfortable, and then they're just going to carry on regardless behind their back. So no, don't call it the internet, because it sounds so 1980s. And you're right. Audio is so multifaceted, and audio can be radio, it can be podcast, it can be a bunch of other things as well. And so for me, it was slightly limiting. And if I'm wearing sort of my capabilities hat and actually wanting people to be smarter, more savvy, and more capable in this space, then calling the internet is far too limiting. And you've got to think about, certainly from a brand perspective, where you are in that purchase funnel and understanding the players throughout that. And there was some other data I was poking around, eMarketer, and when they did their report, they called it sort of TV, but then they excluded digital, and they called it radio but excluded off-air, and they called it print but excluded digital. I'm thinking, so it was kind of binary the way things were bucketed together. But if you're a marketer today, you've got to think, we talked about search earlier, you've got to think about the throughout the funnel where you show up and how you show up. I think one of the most misunderstood areas, and one of the areas which is going to, I think, catch a lot of folks out, is really the participation on retailer sites and actually understanding that search happens on a lot of occasions actually on the retailer site versus on Google, and showing up with the right content, having the right product pages, having the right presence in those spaces, and lower down the funnel, what your own brand strategy is in terms of owned versus paid and purchase media, having a more holistic strategy. And so if you look at what's going on with a lot of the players out there, they're moving really quickly when it comes to new ad formats. They are encroaching on branded search that brands might have. They are coming up with product comparison in when you're sort of checking out of a reach. So there's so much going on. I think calling it internet is limiting. And for marketers out there, don't be passive. Don't be out of date. You've got to really immerse in this space. So yes, this report is kind of codifying things, but it's a bit of a red herring if you just stop there and say, here's 52% of my budget, put it on the internet. That's the worst case scenario that can happen. But you can imagine a lot of people like you can imagine chief finance officers saying, I read this report and you're supposed to put 52% on the internet. And now you're spinning for 3 weeks trying to explain, oh, that's not exactly what it said. So
but maybe you are. I mean, that's the thing when I looked at the data, I went right back to Mary Meeker's Internet Trends report. And my favorite slide from that report since 2010 is the slide that looks at the percentage of attention that we spend as consumers by medium and the percentage of ad dollars that go to those mediums. And we are 100% aligned with following the eyeballs at this point. She tends to break it out by desktop and mobile. And guess what? The 2018 report indicates 18% of our time as consumers is spent on desktop, and 18% of the digital spend, or of spend in general from a marketing perspective, is spent on desktop. 33% on mobile, 33% of our spend is going to mobile. So we are following the eyeballs where they go by and large. Far better than in 2010 when 33% of our time was spent in quote unquote internet and 19.5% of our spend was there. So we have caught up as an industry to spending our dollars where consumers are actually spending their time.
Yeah, but we haven't caught up in terms of the quality of that spend.
Agreed.
We're not spending it well. And I think that's to the point that there are three or four major companies that are getting most of the money. Right. I mean, Google is at 37.2%. This is from eMarketer, February 2019. Facebook is at 22.1%, and Amazon is rising quickly at 8.8%. And so it's not like it was before when the ad money was spread around a bit. This is kind of all going to a few large, huge companies.
Fair, but that's where we're spending our time. Right. We're spending our time on Google and on YouTube and on Facebook and on Instagram. And that's where we spend our time as consumers. So those dollars are flowing accordingly. I'd love to find a way to fracture that out. And if we looked at it a layer deeper, Bob, and looked at the different ad types, I'm sure it would be far more interesting data. But looking at it from this very top view, the thing that still strikes me as really interesting is we're overspending in print and underspending in radio. When you look at it in that way, those are the two that are sort of disjointed. TV, desktop, and mobile is completely aligned with where the eyeballs are.
Well, a sample of one, if I wanted to have a good experience, I'm going to pick up a physical copy of Fast Company versus going online, because I can't get through an article without being bombarded, interrupted, and downright frustrated. And so I think some of these other channels can improve or win in terms of user experience, because our dissatisfaction and our cynicism with some of these other touch points, especially if everything is Google and Facebook, I'm not sure that's the right thing for the rest of the industry and marketplace. So I know some of the other retailers are stepping up as well to sort of strengthen their platforms. But I'm there's a renaissance in audio, there's a renaissance in podcasts, and I think there is going to be a renaissance in publishing as well. So maybe some of those channels or mediums can thrive in an environment where digital kind of hasn't got its act together, even though I'm also one of the digital people on this call.
Well, I want to move on because we're running out of time, and I want to make sure we cover this topic, because for the most part, the industry is finally starting to distinguish, between blockchain and Bitcoin, and we're starting to see the fruits of blockchain systems for preventing ad fraud, bringing transparency to how deals are getting done. Chris, let me ask you just point blank and then maybe give a little bit of perspective. Is blockchain finally hitting its stride, or does it still have a long way to go and we're just looking at a bunch of hype and not really looking at reality?
Oh boy. Well, I think some of that question is a little bit of that Bitcoin lagger that's still kind of there. Bitcoin had all of its enthusiasm kind of knocked around over the past year and a half or so. And it is good that blockchain's kind of gone out of the shadow of just Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was certainly a digital currency that operates on blockchain. But now we're seeing advertising finding a way to utilize blockchain because of the verification piece. So we talked earlier about, some of the quotes on ad fraud: 75% wasted money not being seen, 20% are fraud, 27% US installed an ad blocker. You're really trying to figure out, is your advertising getting to the people that your advertisers say it's getting to? And really, blockchain has come into the advertising space to help verify that. And it's a pretty interesting piece. There's some companies out there, Lucidity, that has been worked with Toyota, and Toyota really worked with them to go ahead and improve quality of their advertising dollars being spent. And so they saw some increases of double-digit percentages on some campaigns they ran, going to their website for similar kind of ad buys. And when they ran this Lucidity tech, which uses blockchain within it to do ad verification, they saw that increase of performance, because the theory is it's getting to real people and it's getting validated ad performance there. So you're really checking to see if your ad dollars are not wasted. And it kind of relates to a lot of what we've really been talking today, even back to that whole idea of trust. I mean, we talked a lot about consumer trust in advertising, but I think there's also ad buyer trust in advertising as advertisers. And this is a really interesting space that blockchain has really kind of come in to kind of help create some momentum and some capabilities and some really advanced functionalities to go ahead and help verifying ad delivery. So I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity within it. That's a lot of what the article that we were talking about for this topic this week really looked at is, blockchain is a way to go ahead and help advertisers feel more secure that their advertising dollars are being spent and showing up in the right spots. Because it's a little bit of an iffy word, especially when everything's into a bar column called the internet, right?
Yeah, right. That's always been the promise of blockchain. I mean, blockchain enthusiasts for the past couple of years have talked again and again about how it would bring about great ad verification. It's a perfect tool for doing ad verification, for making sure that fraud doesn't happen, that ads are connecting, that both the publisher and the advertiser are knowing how deals are getting done and feeling better about the price transparency that's going on. But what I'm trying to get to is it really working now? Is it working so well that everybody should be using it? And I think that's a little bit still out there in terms of a question. I mean, Sean, what's your take on this? Have you had much experience working with blockchain technology?
I have not, and my head went right to a different source of fraud, which was on the consumer and e-commerce side, right? Having just left a position where we did deal with a pretty significant amount of purchasing fraud and credit card fraud, I would love to see the technology. I think you need a level of penetration and adoption that's sort of mass market across a number of different major players for it to happen. But I think it would be a really interesting play to see that eliminated, that type of fraud. I've not really seen it on the ad tech and the ad delivery side, though.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, Tamara.
I've read a really interesting article about a blockchain test that took so much processing power that it was the equivalent of running a household electricity for 6 months. And so it is not very green. It is still taking too much processing power for it to be an on the edge sort of, instant verification.
I am so glad you brought this up, because this has always been the big problem that I've had with all blockchain technology, is just that the more that ledger gets filled up, the more processing power it takes and the longer it takes to get a transaction through.
Yeah, but there are venture capitalists and entire groups of people who are trying to solve this problem. And, just like with all the other big data challenges, I'm pretty sure they'll solve it. It'll probably have to do with, turning the quality down a little bit to make it a little faster. But in general, I think we're still in that early innovation stage where it's mostly hype. but it will come along and it will be a big factor in some amount of time, 5-10 years.
I'll just quickly jump in and say, again, don't ask me how to explain the back end. And I'm sure if you ask 5 people to define blockchain, you're going to get 5 different answers. So I'm not on that side of it. But I've been speaking to a couple of people in this space, and actually there is some hope. And it's this whole, the first topic we talked about, trust, throughout the show. There's a lot of ways that blockchain can actually address some of those issues with advertising from the consumer side, as someone else has said on here. But even just something as simple as, hey, if I want more transparency, I can actually validate if the T-shirt I'm wearing or the sneakers I'm buying were made in a sweatshop or not. And there is a third party. There's a way to get that information quickly and easily and verified through that system. So there are some use cases that could be built in a way that solves some of the more fundamental issues we have with brands or with advertising. And if blockchain helps deliver that in a fast and effective way, could actually address, as I say, this trust gap, because I think the e-commerce credit card fraud was one example, as I say, knowing where things are made, or food, vouching that it is truly organic or it truly has those ingredients. All of those things where I have uncertainty. Give me the certainty as a consumer, and you have pricing power, you have quality. And so there are some benefits that I'm sure are coming along in the very near future.
New Balance just made an announcement that they're utilizing a blockchain vendor for that very purpose, actually, Sam. It was really interesting.
But I'm gathering from the way this conversation is going that nobody really, on this call at least, really feels that blockchain is ready for prime time, that it's mainly about promise, and that it still has a lot of technical hoops to jump through. Am I right in that estimation, Tamara? I mean, it's just like, it seems like that's what you're all saying.
Well, that's what I'm reading. I haven't been involved in a blockchain exact experience. I have talked to people who have been trying it, and they are telling me that it's too much processing power so far. But like I said, there could be people in stealth mode who've already figured it out and cracked the code, and we'll hear about them next week, and who knows. This is the way technology goes. We've been in this technology business for a while. And we recognize that innovation sometimes comes, slowly and then quickly.
Chris, any last thoughts on this? I mean, it's just like, do you feel like it's ready to be experimented with, or would you counsel for people to hold off and, just kind of wait and see what's going to happen over the next 12 months?
I think there's some earlier experimentation already happening with large brands, as we've already heard and talked about. Mm-hmm. We'll see where it goes. I mean, there's probably some prohibitive cost for everyone to start doing it. There's also the prohibitive green aspect and processing aspect that we talked about too. So it's early, and we'll see where it kind of innovates.
Well, last but not least on the topic list for this evening, Facebook revealed its plan for a VR world called Facebook Horizon. Sean, let's talk about this.
Oh, my heavens. Where do I begin? Thanks, Bob. Can I have a binary question? Back to the beginning.
Yes.
Yes. My answer is yes.
Yes or no.
Well, I mean, as the self-described old fogey of the bunch, I have this to say. Just get off my lawn already, Facebook. I mean, this is Second Life, right? I mean, I've been laughing at these types of situations since 2003 when Second Life originally launched. Come to find out, Second Life is still around with the same million users that started in 2003. So I went to the experts. I talked to my kids. I asked them what they thought about this, and they all kind of laughed. And their laughter was more focused. It's really interesting. I think I've got 3 kids that are just against walled gardens, and their approach was that Facebook, in the approach that they're taking, is requiring Facebook hardware to even play in this garden. And there are a number of other sort of interesting, similar worlds that are already out there. Of course, those worlds don't bring 10 billion. How many billions of users now that Facebook can bring to bear? I don't know. I think VR and AR is interesting and filled with promise in a very niche way. I think, again, if the eyeballs flow there, I think our advertising dollars will follow. I think it's way too early to tell whether that's going to be much of a real thing or if it's just the latest announcement from Facebook.
I thought about this topic, how to write it up, how to ask questions about this, and I'm just so lost in terms of how to approach it, because it feels like I'm way back in 2010 or 2008, and I'm talking to one of my early panels about Second Life. I mean, it really does feel like the VR version of Second Life, and it's no accident that the entire team that developed Horizon was given copies of Ready Player One.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like way back when they bought Oculus, they immediately put them in terms of thinking about it in that aspect. I mean, as if it was some kind of multiplayer world where you live most of your life in this digital environment. Sam,
I think that my son said the same thing. He's 12. He said, well, you have to have an Oculus for that.
Right. Yeah.
That was his exact words. And so we got the same reaction from our kids, was who are most likely to try this. Let's be honest, those of us who are in the real world, although I would like to create my own avatar. I think that would be really fun. And I could make her really tall. But, in the world that I live in, I'd rather be face to face. But those guys, I think they'd be willing to try it, but they're not going to try it on a super expensive Oculus headset.
Yeah, I mean, I'm again, I remember Second Life the first time round and trying to explain it and trying to get people to invest in it or to poke around was quite difficult at the time. And so I don't want to be a Luddite and sort of say, no, this new thing, how dare you? I see Facebook coming at it because they've got lots and lots of money. And so they can do R&D and innovation and sort of afford to fail. So I kind of commend them from the perspective of trying to do something. I'm just concerned with the brand that has had some issues in terms of privacy and integrity of late, that they cannot have a snafu when it comes to trust or online safety or have anything shady happen with this. And especially as I think we're responding, it feels more like it's going to be targeted, or younger people are going to be responding to it. It already worries me that are Facebook responsible enough to do this in the right way?
Well, that was one of the things that I felt like they were getting right in the article, at least in the presentation. God knows whether or not they're really going to carry through on this, but it seems like the way it has been structured from the beginning is learning from the mistakes of how Facebook was built. It's kind of like they're taking the learnings of building this other platform that has all these loopholes and problems and all kinds of issues with dealing with controversy, and they've baked in a system for dealing with that right at the ground root level.
Who is they though? Who is writing the algorithm? We're nervous.
Yeah, well,
if it's
and
the
does
same,
it scale?
Yeah. Who are the coders? Who are the designers?
But you know how it is with technology. I mean, if you start off from the beginning with something in mind, it's a lot easier to handle the problems later on down the line. When you build something with the sole purpose of we're going to get all their data and we're going to be able to use it and monetize it and blah, 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 and then suddenly have to deal with the privacy implications of that, it's a much harder situation to rectify. So, I mean, it seems like they've approached it with the right mindset. I'm not arguing that they'll probably get it wrong, but I mean,
but what's the right mindset? Is it neutering everyone? Because everything from the waist down had nothing.
Yeah, there's no legs, right? Yeah, exactly. Because that's the other thing. Why are there no legs on this thing? I wanted to say. I'm glad I didn't say that first.
I think that's the safety they're putting in. Yeah. Nobody can have sex on this.
Where are my legs in this world?
No, they talked about kill switches and being able to jump out,
jump into a safe space.
Into a safe space. Yeah, I mean, they were really thinking through those problems from the beginning, which is different from Facebook. I mean, Facebook was designed to capture all of our data and know everything about us, and thus.
And now what they're going to do is they're going to get us create sort of avatars in another world, and then know all about our desires, secrets, fantasies, and sort of alter egos and things. So, I mean, I like to think that they will act as good citizens, and as I say, I think this is their opportunity to do that, because this is a grand stage to, if in 3 years' time we're having a different show about this, Bob. So I think it's an opportunity.
Oh, I can guarantee you in 3 years we'll have a completely different show about this, and it will be not very pretty.
Okay, so is that guaranteed? Okay, we've got to come back in 3 years and talk about this
That's
story.
right, you'll have us back.
And how right
tomorrow
gets predictions.
It's like a bean
lift ads.
It's like a bean.
Here's a funny thing though. If it was coming out from Apple, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Isn't that weird?
So true.
They can get away with a walled garden, whereas no one else can.
Brand matters, everybody. Brand matters.
Well, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. Yes, I changed the name of the program. Get over it again. We're going to call it the Fair, Foul, Foul now. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Chris Backus. You can find him, I guess the best website to find you is urw.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's our company. And you can find me on Twitter at cbackus.
So anything you want to promote?
No, I don't have anything to promote. Just on here talking some good advertising with a bunch of friends.
Oh, fantastic. Now, next up, we have Tamara Gaffney. You can find her at quantentmarketing.com. I'll have the link in the show notes. Tell us what's going on in your world, Tamara. What would you like to promote?
Well, I'm actually going to go speak in various numbers of events. So
you make that sound so surprising. You make that sound so surprising, and it's not surprising at all. You're a fabulous speaker.
Well, I actually am putting together my predictions. I call it 10 for 20. So the 10 things you have to know for 2020. And if anyone wants me to come speak, contact me. I have a long history of providing predictions which have come true. So I think I'm a gypsy fortune teller, but I'll leave that up to you. And I've also been working on training programs for analysts groups in large companies, help them to really up their game from dashboards to actionable C-level insights. So if you have any needs for that, then I'm open to help. So let me know.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, Tamara is a great person and a fantastic analyst. So you definitely want to work with her. Next up, Sean McGinnis. Sean, I don't know how to promote you, so you're going to have to promote yourself. Tell me what would you like to talk about? What would you like to share?
Yeah. Let's talk about the fact that I'm actually available for hire. I've left my last position, and if you're looking for someone with, 10, 12 years experience in digital, having led teams of 150 or more and media spends of about 70 million or more, let's have a conversation. I'm talking with some executive recruiters and private equity owners now, but open for consulting and project work in the meantime, but open to reload from our place here in Utah. So find me on LinkedIn, Sean McGinnis.
And Sean has done some really amazing things in advertising. You should definitely look him up. I'll put his LinkedIn profile on the show notes so you can check him out. And last but not least, Sam Mani. You can find him at marketingtransformed.com. I'm not sure, is that the name of your new company, or is that just a place where you're housing your podcast?
Well, Bob, thank you for asking. This is the shameless plug section of the show. Forget all of that bad Brexit stuff you've heard about the British people, and now look forward to a brand new podcast that is coming to the airwaves. It's called Across the Pond, Marketing Transformed, Bob. That is what I'm shamelessly plugging here. And it's a podcast that we talk about transforming your business, marketing strategy, whether you're a rising star, an entrepreneur, or an experienced professional, how to create that optimum marketing strategy, inspire success, and build a growth mindset for you and your company. No, I've not just read that verbatim from the website, but it might also be a lie. Actually, that is verbatim from the website. So I am promoting my new podcast, Bob, and I appreciate you having me on here to promote my podcast. But I'm really excited about it. There's two Brits on there, which is hence why it's called Across the Pond. My buddy Chris Lawson, who's based in the UK, and I'm based in Philadelphia. And we talk marketing transformation and all things positive and optimistic. So we focus on solutions, provocations, and inspiration for marketers out there. So you can find out more at marketingtransformed.com or all the usual platforms, your Apple, your Spotify, your SoundClouds and Stitchers and all those good and wonderful places.
And Sam is definitely somebody you want to hire for any kind of consultancy. He's somebody who is every bit as exciting and as excitable as you've heard this evening on the show. He's somebody who's just constantly bursting with ideas. So check him out at marketingtransform.com. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. Works a lot like the good, bad, and ugly, except that I found out too many other people were using good, bad, ugly, so I had to come up with something a little bit more clever.
Fair enough.
So fair for this week. This is the wonderful one. Now I say wonderful, but it's like pretty sad. The gun violence organization Sandy Hook Promised unleashed the TV ad Back to School Essentials. Basically, it runs exactly like a back to school ad, only kids are getting killed in the background and you have people getting shot and you hear gunfire in the school, and it's actually an anti-gun ad or a gun control ad. I'm going to open this up to the floor to let everybody talk about this one. I think it was really effective, if maybe a little over the top, but it's still incredibly memorable and very powerful. What are your thoughts?
I hated it.
Oh, I'm not a parent, and so I can't. I have empathy, but I can't relate as well as people with parents. I mean, it was hard to look, and my fear is that this ad makes people look away and sort of retrench and not be open to the message here. But as I say, folks who are on this who are parents, I can only empathize with how they might respond to this, because sadly it's true. So I do commend BBDO and for standing up and having a voice and perhaps taking a stance on this. We talked earlier about trust and brands and advertisers. I just hope it does good and it doesn't sort of polarize us more. So that's my take. As I said, I'm not a parent, so I can't even imagine what it's like to be a parent in these times.
Okay, Tamara, why do you hate it?
Because it didn't educate me. It didn't tell me what to do. It didn't give me any next steps. I just kind of watched the whole thing, and at the end I thought, that what do I do with this besides be depressed? So for me it just didn't lead me to anything
that's really interesting.
Upset.
That's really interesting, and it's true. It doesn't lead you to any specific action, which is problematic. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, my family watched it. I have twin 13-year-old boys, and they found it fascinating. Obviously said, wow, that went in a completely different direction than what we thought. But it created a conversation. And I think that was what was interesting about it, and the emotional impact and the memorable impact of it was pretty high on it. So yes, there was no direct call to action per se, definitely a miss. But I think it really helped with the dialogue of this is kind of the state that we're in, and what can we really do to do something about it.
And how about you, Sean?
I don't think it's going to change any hearts or minds. I think, people are pretty well entrenched on the things that they believe at this point when it comes to gun control. And so I commend them for the effort, but I don't think it's going to get at the heart of moving anybody one way or the other.
Well, moving on to the fail of the week. This one's a great one. Advertising Week New York went to great lengths all week long to affirm that the future is female and that sexism needs to be a part of the past and that we have changed as an industry and we are changing. And then they closed the entire event with a performance by Pitbull with his twerking, scantily clad dancers, which kind of pissed a lot of people off.
Unreal.
I mean, the ad industry is just bizarre to me when you think about it. I mean, it's just like they're so woke washed.
Jeez.
I mean, Bob, this is I was at having breakfast or lunch with someone on that Thursday, and basically sort of predicted something was going to happen, and then literally the end of the day this story came out, and it was just a sigh, because until the industry changes, I am in marketing and advertising, and it's unfortunate, and it happens in so many different contexts, and I don't think there was a panel, an all male panel at this year's event. I don't think there was one, but probably. And so I'm just nervous that the industry is not keeping up to pace with culture, and I think the trust issue is probably being eroded by things like this faster than anything else that's happening. It's sad, and I just hope for next year that the folks involved in leadership actually look around and realize that they need to have more diverse and inclusive voices actually making decisions and not just being consulted.
That's it.
I feel sorry for the events person who didn't connect those dots. And is probably either fired or really in the doghouse right now. And it's hard to run those events and have everything go flawless. I just feel for them. I really do. Those poor event folks.
Yeah, I agree, Sam. I think the right people in the room, and this never happens, right? I mean, if you're in the room and have power and are making those decisions, I think having diverse viewpoints, it's really easy to avoid these kind of issues from popping up. I think it's a real shame that, the dialogue, I think, is shifting, and I think we've made a great deal of progress. And I think to have something like this, especially at the end night, undermine and sort of everyone go, oh, eye rolling moment where you look back and go, thanks for all the progress, right?
Well, let's talk for just a second about why is Pitbull still doing that type of thing?
Because Pitbull is Pitbull.
That's what I talk about cultural relevance. It's people are questioning what he did, but also why him in the first place. Right. So that's why I'm saying that there was a cultural gap. There was whoever made the decisions. There were other voices. I'm sure there were other voices in the chain who suggested other things, and they never manifested. I went to a session with Wyclef Jean, and he got a bunch of industry people to play songs, and he was telling the story of how he wrote stuff. That was so inspiring, compelling about creativity, about storytelling, about music, about art, about culture. So there were other awesome things. I just think they missed the boat here with that, and I think that one I talked about, Wyclef Jean, was put on by Bonin Bao, and again, another black guy sort of getting. So I just think in next year it's gonna be better. We're gonna be better off for it because they won't make this mistake again, providing, as I said, the decision makers look more like the community in the world that we live in versus the current leaders of Madison Avenue and some of these decision makers. And again, I know I'm kind of calling people out there, but I want to be a force for good. So let's hope that they're receptive to not make the same mistake next year and actually improve and win hearts and minds.
And Billie Eilish was in town. She did SNL the next night. So
there you go. There you go. Well, yeah. See, SNL gets it right.
Well, the foul of the week is UK travel firm Thomas Cook abruptly shut down, leaving thousands of passengers stranded around the world. If you don't know Thomas Cook, I guess Sam can enlighten us, but Thomas Cook is a travel agent and an airline and a whole bunch of hotel properties, etc. This was not a pretty sight, what was going on in the UK over the last week.
So Bob, you're not helping me trying to rebrand the situation. So I'd rather talk about my podcast than another failing British Empire establishment thing going wrong in the UK. So yes,
you live in Philadelphia. You live in Philadelphia. I don't even want to hear it from you.
Yes, it was a shame. There was actually a story of a flight that was run by a bunch of Thomas Cook employees, and they got the passengers to where they were going to, and none of the Thomas Cook employees were getting paid. So they just did it because they did the right thing. So that was a heartwarming story that came out of this. But it's sad all around. Damage to the brand, and yeah, again, there are British things that are succeeding right now, and I'd like to focus more on those.
Okay.
But then Virgin Airlines put up a site just to hire off some of those cabin crews. So there was actually some good stories coming out of it of people helping each other, of big brands like British Airways and Virgin stepping up. There's a silver lining here.
Yeah,
kind of a bad story, but
there was a company called TUI who was offshoot kind of former sister brand who set up a job fair for employees in the home base market. So yeah, there was a lot of good came out of it, and there are some checks and regulations and sort of legislation and insurance that gets people to where they need to be. So it wasn't. It was bad, but there was some mitigating solves out there. But as I say, think positive about Britain, and if you're English right now, focus on England in the Rugby World Cup. British music, Adele's got a new album coming out in 2 months.
I'll give you another thing to think about. So basically what we're all saying is what's fair is foul and what's foul is fair.
Sure.
Just pointing that out.
Nice.
Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. Well, if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly